Thank you, John and Mark. That sounds biblical. I think there may be any number of things that you and I would all agree on. One of the things that I think we could universally agree on is stuff is way too expensive. Everything. Housing, nuts. Cars, ridiculous. Gas, breaking me. Lumber, groceries, meat, eggs, vegetables, even dirt is expensive. You bought dirt lately, you know. And while I would suggest to you that while, things got, post-COVID got really expensive, they were expensive before COVID. They've been expensive for a long time. And it's just gotten progressively worse. Tennis shoes. You remember when you paid $19 for tennis shoes? Now the tax is $19 on tennis shoes. Blue jeans. The more holes, the more expensive. I've discovered makeup is ridiculously expensive. Tires, car batteries, everything has just gotten way too expensive. And I would suggest to you it's probably made almost everybody step back and think a little bit from time to time before they buy stuff about whether or not this is really worth it. I mean, some people will buy things to plug into your car to extend the gas mileage that are a complete ripoff. But we've gotten where we've all become, educated consumers about whether or not we want to spend that kind of money on stuff. I want to suggest to you this morning that when we think about the actual return on investment, that maybe the one thing that we should spend more time talking about is something that the cost hasn't changed. Now, the challenges and the pressures to pay the cost have gotten more difficult, but the costs are the same. And what we are going to look at this morning about the true cost of discipleship comes directly from the mouth of the Lord. Now, all the songs we've been singing, who will follow? I will follow. We're going to sing some more follow songs after this. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the real cost of discipleship. Described in Luke 14, we see, as we're going to see, that Christ's followers were going along behind Him. They were being attracted to Him. They were, if you will, following Him. And the definition of a disciple is a learner, a follower, or a student. So when we're talking about the real cost of being a disciple, of being a learner, a follower, or a student of His, we see that in their case, that unless their lives were being changed, their following really didn't amount to anything for them. In discipleship, there has to be a sacrifice. There must be some form of consecration. There must be some form of commitment. We have to be loyal to serve Him and to follow Him. And today, I would suggest to you that just looking at what the religious world looks like in America, there's a pretty poor understanding of what it really means to be a follower of His based on what He told us. And there are important things that go along with any commitment that we're going to try to make to say that we're going to be one of His disciples. And so I want us to really dig in for just a few minutes and talk about the cost of discipleship. Let's look at Luke 14. Now great multitudes went with Him, Jesus, and He turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and doesn't hate his father and his mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, yes, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever doesn't bear his cross, come after me, cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, doesn't sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish? All who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and he was not able to finish. Or what king goes to war against another king that does not sit down first and consider whether he's able, with 10,000 men to go out and come against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions for peace. And so likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Okay, so that whole discussion, all of those examples lead up to Jesus saying, if you want to be a follower of mine, remember the multitudes following him, he turns to them and this is what he's going to say to them. We have this incredible crowd apparently, and it had been growing all along. Verse 25, great multitudes went with him. Many were following him because it was a free meal. They were getting well fed because he was seeing to it that they were being fed. Others were following him just because of the stuff he was doing. This was the greatest sideshow in their culture. Come see the miracles this guy is better than any of our sorcerers. There were others who were following them because they were going along with this crowd that was building. We talked about mob mentality last week. You know, there are people who just will go along because that's what everybody else is doing. Sadly. And there were others who were doing it because it was just a convenient thing for them to do. All right, and so as we think about that, now he's going to turn and say something to them. And as we read, he's going to take this opportunity, stops, turns around and says, let me explain to you who want to follow me what it's going to take if you really want to do that. And so he wanted them to understand what's the real price, what's the real cost. Before you think you want to jump in and buy what you're being told, here's what it's going to take. I think Jesus thought, you know, it may be time to really give them some idea. Because there's probably a whole bunch of them out here who are following for the wrong reason. Many of his disciples heard this. This is a hard saying. Who can understand it? When Jesus knew it himself that his disciples complained about this, he said to them, does this offend you? There were those who were following him and had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Just seemed like a fun thing to do. Got nothing else to do? Let's go follow him for a while and watch. And oh, we get to eat. And from many times, his disciples went back and walked with him no more. Jesus said to them, do you want to also go away? Once it was clarified with them what he was actually saying, several of them said, you know, this isn't what I signed on for. I didn't understand it that way. Hey, thanks. Good to see you. And they turned and walked away. And Jesus is going to now try to make sure that he stamps on their heart. Did you catch that line in the song? Imprint on their heart what the true meaning is of trying to follow him. I want us to think about what this cost turns out to be. In terms of what it means to be consecrated, he's going to give an example. He's going to talk about personal relationships. This passage is one that every time I read it, the short hairs on my neck go up just a little bit and I begin to itch just a little. If anyone comes to me and doesn't hate his father, his mother, his wife, his children, his brothers, his sister, yeah, he doesn't hate his own life. He cannot be my disciple. And when we think of that, how is it that we are supposed to do this? Well, first off, we need to understand that the relationship that we have with the Lord is supposed to affect our relationship with others. And it's supposed to do that by moving them down in our priorities to put a spot at the top for Him. And what we're expected to have is completely, carefully chosen word, unadulterated love for Christ. No others can break that relationship. Napoleon understood this principle. Here's what he said. I know men, and I will tell you that Jesus Christ is no mere man. Between Him and every other person in the world, there is absolutely no comparison. Alexander the Great, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I have all founded empires. But on what did we rest the creations of our genius? Upon force. Jesus Christ founded His empire upon love. At this hour, millions of men would die for Him. This morning, John prayed about those who have sacrificed, sometimes even their lives, for our nation. Jesus sacrificed His life for all nations. And He was willing to do that. And so He has an expectation about what our relationship with Him is going to be and what our priorities are going to look like by saying, look, here's the way it boils down. You really want to follow me? Well, it's got to get down to this. It's either me or you. It's either me or your family. It's either me or me. That's your choice. He wants them to understand that. And we are not supposed to allow anyone, not even our family, to hinder us from being a true disciple of His. Now, we know, all of us, I suspect, all of us have family members who don't believe like we do. We have them. Now, we have some pretty close in our family that don't think like we do. And so what we have to decide is, because they think differently than I do, what is that going to mean to the way that I choose to believe? And what is it going to mean in terms of my relationship with those members of my own family? Because depending upon the answer to that question about how our relationship is going to be affected, if they are obviously non-believers and have made that very clear, he who is not with me is against me. He who does not gather with me instead scatters. We have to be aware that there are those who would elect to try to do that, who would try to move you away from your faith. You can't serve two masters. In this example, he says you're either going to serve God or you're going to serve money. And we have people who are sometimes even close to us that are making choices between serving money and serving God. And then he goes on to say, you will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake. It was a warning. It was a warning that people that you absolutely, that you foundationally, sacrificially love may attempt to move you away from your faith. And he says, we can't do that, and we don't want that. The theologian Charles Spurgeon, talking about the passage of hating father, mother, brother, yourself, he said, this is only to be in a comparative sense, not literally. We're not supposed to literally hate our own family. That the term can possibly be used and to make very clear that Christ said that we are to hate our own life. He says, be aware, this isn't to be taken literal. He's saying don't let anybody, don't let anything take a priority over your discipleship. Christ has to be number one. He won't stand for being number two. There will be no other gods before me. If you read anything in the Old Testament, you find out that God is a jealous God. He has a spot for it. He wants us there. He wants us to have a life where He is put at the center of our core and all things that we do, and He won't take anything else. Because he who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoop. He's going to deal with what motivates us. Oh. You need it back. There you go. Okay, what was I talking about? He deals with our own personal desires. In the day of Christ, any reference to the cross was a reference to death. And we have to understand, the Scriptures teaches us, that our own desires, our own will, they have to be made secondary. And that means renouncing our old self and giving ourselves over to Him. That's what it means to be dying to self. And you can look at all of the passages. You know, when Paul says, I am crucified, we know what crucifixion looked like. No longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. He says that you have to die to yourself. Those who are in Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. That has to be put away, has to be done. If you were raised with Christ, raised in a picture of Him being raised from the tomb, from the dead, if we have been raised from the tomb where we put the old man to death in baptism, we will then rise where Christ is and sit at the right hand of God. He's going to deal with that. Anyone who doesn't bear his cross cannot come after me and cannot be my disciple. I want to suggest 3 questions to help us know whether that's happened. Have you honestly and objectively taken your life's goals and transferred those to doing what you can as a servant of His? That's a fairly straightforward, easy to understand question. What is it that's important to you? Secondly, do your goals feed your ego more than they glorify God? If your goals are all about you, why is it that you are more important than God is in your own life, in your own mind? And third, are you willing to change your goals if they don't meet the approval of God? What is the single most important 3 things you want to accomplish in your life, in this life? And do any of those have anything to do with the next life? Do you have a Burger King religion? Have it my way. Or is it have it His way? And that's what we have to keep looking for. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way. And Jesus says to this multitude, you think you want to follow me? Let's talk about what that means. You can't have it your way. You got to have it my way. That's what He's trying to emphasize. Then He's going to talk about their own possessions. Do not allow things that you own to own you. I'm just sitting back and waiting. Because there are going to be a whole lot of really nice houses go on the market really cheaply. When we see a whole lot of people trying to tread water backwards as they go under. Because they have allowed their house. Do you know why I'm old? Why I've only owned 1 new car in my entire life? Because I'm cheap. And I'm not going to pay more for a car than I paid for my first house. And when they become a priority, when those things become a priority, you know, that's what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 6 when He said, look, don't worry about stuff. I've got stuff for you. You need to worry about the things that are going to make a difference in your life. And we see people who have become slaves to all kinds of things. I got one of those little pop-up things online yesterday that wanted me to look at something. And I usually just kind of ignore them, but I looked at this one. Because it was a hotel that the entire hotel was built inside a cave. And I thought, that looks pretty cool. I'd like to see that. And so I looked that up. And then I had to Google the name of the town because I didn't recognize it. And then I had to Google the name of the country because of the way it was spelled. And there's a little town in Turkey where you can stay in a cave hotel with rock swimming pools in your room for $156 a night. But that's cheap. I might be extravagant enough to go to Turkey to get in a cave swimming pool. But there are people who the only thing that seems to matter to them are those things that are going to bring them cash. The point here that I would make is when he says, don't love the world, either things, hold on to everything you got loosely. Because you may need to let it go. Or it may be taken from you without your choice. And so we have to know that when he says to them that God may require you, Jesus said, you might be required to give up all of this. This night your soul will be required of you, then those things, or then those things be which you have provided. Everything you own could be gone in a heartbeat. When Paul criticized Demas, he loved the present world too much. He got things out of priority. And this you all know, that have those in Asia have turned away from me. We're going to be studying that on Wednesday night upcoming. That the things that were important to them, they got out of whack and they lost track of those. When Abraham was told that he needed to go sacrifice his son. You want to know a test of whether or not you hate your father or your mother or your kids more than him? Have God tell you to give up your child. There's a test. We'll find out whether or not God has priority. Or Job. You know, the example of Job, just the first couple of chapters, you know, reading everything that he had that was gone. Jesus says, today, you need to be prepared if you're going to have the true cost of discipleship, to be willing to give all of that up. Now here's the reason. He gives us illustrations. He talks about this building. And what the illustrations are supposed to do, if you read it carefully, it actually says this, is to force you to think. To sit down and consider what it means to make this commitment. And that's why he used that example with this crowd. You know, when you and I decided to be a disciple, when we surrendered ourselves in baptism, we signed a contract. We knew the conditions going in. And we have to think about what it means to make a pledge, a vow, a commitment, a contract, have an agreement. When you make a vow to God, don't delay, pay it. You've been better off not to vow than to make a vow and then not pay. I try to talk to couples who are going to be married about what that marriage agreement, what that bond, what that covenant, what it means that they're about to undertake. Because we live in a time where so many things are disposable, I need them to understand that this is the same sort of agreement that you made when you became a Christian. You're now making that same sort of agreement with your spouse. Sacrifice and love and sacrificial love. And we need to think about what the real cost is today. Then he goes on and he says, you don't build a tower before you sit down and think about whether or not, once you build the foundation, you're going to have enough resources to build the rest of it. Then he says we need to think about this illustration. Before you sink in and to fight, You know, you got 10,000 men and you're thinking, oh, the enemy's got 20,000. He says, you know, you may want to send a messenger out there and see if there's any kind of peace agreement before you do this. He said you really need to think about before you dispatch them. It doesn't mean count the cost or else you will be destroyed. He's saying you need to count the cost and then you need to be prepared to do whatever is necessary. And if you have to go to battle, he says, I'm going to equip you for what that battle is going to look like. And we need to have the strength to win this fight. You know, we have to count the cost or we'll be stuck paying the price. Now, he's going to summarize this, and it's really kind of fascinating how this happens. He says, salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? Now, this isn't the passage that we typically turn to when we're talking about light and salt. But I'm not sure that this one doesn't give us better information than Matthew. Because we know what salt does. Salt is supposed to save things from becoming corrupt. You know, it's supposed to keep it from degenerating. That's why they pack their meat in salt, was to keep it from spoiling. And, like my wife, the more salt on the food, the better. And so what do we see in the world and the church? You know, there are people in the world who can add flavor but can't save us from corruption. And there are people in the church who might be able to save us from corruption that aren't adding anything to the flavor or the taste of life in the church. We need disciples who are going to do both. You know, we need people who are in their discipleship who are willing to help people to keep from becoming corrupted. And we need those who are going to help them to understand what the real blessings are in this life and the next one. We need disciples who are willing to pay the price. And so here's where we are. Did you decide, or will you decide to pay the price? Are you willing to consecrate, to dedicate, to give yourself? You know what the cost of discipleship demands. He says, when you do this, I want to be number one, and I never want to be number two again. And then we have to figure out whether or not we're willing to follow him and do it in the right and the proper way. How do we know that? According to what his word says. And so will you? Are you willing to do that? Well, the plan is pretty simple. We've mentioned it many times. You know what you're supposed to do, what you need to do. The steps are obvious and clear, and they're consistent, particularly in the book of Acts, when we see all of those people who, after the day of Pentecost, were offered an opportunity to hear the Word of God, to hear the gospel. This was what each instance they were expected to do. And that we need to find ourselves in Christ. I don't know about you, but I sometimes look at things and think, I'm not willing to do that. That's too expensive. Example, yesterday morning. Making dinner reservations in the city of Chicago. Wanted to have steaks at one of their better steakhouses in Chicago. Went and looked at, found one that was highly rated, looked good, everything. So let me glance at the menu. Pulled it up, laughed, closed it, went to another site. Told Lisa, I'm not willing to pay $99 for a ribeye a la carte. It doesn't come with anything. Price is too much. You know, I watch Price is Right. I do. Sinful pleasure. They got a game on there where they've got this item. They got a car, and they start putting price tags up. And they put them up, and as they go further, they go higher and higher and higher and higher, and the contestant has to decide when to stop. Because if the price tag they put up is higher than the car, they have to scream, "That's too much." There are people today who won't become a Christian because it's just too much. The price is too high. They don't want to do that. It's going to interfere with what they want and what they want to do. It's going to interfere with their understanding about what makes someone wholesome or makes them a pious person. I have, quote, a personal relationship with God. I don't need no church. I don't really need no Bible. I just hope they don't need no heaven. Because we don't get to pick. We have to read and we have to respond. That's why Jesus told that multitude, you want to follow me? Let's see after I tell you this. Same for us. Are we willing to do what is necessary? This morning we're going to sing this song as a means of encouragement for you. If you're not a Christian, you want to be, we're here to help you today. We're going to pray for you. We're going to plead with you. We're going to beg. We want you to go to heaven. And for those of us who are Christians, we are disciples. We are the ones who signed the agreement. We are the ones who made the contract. How you doing? You need to fix some things? There's something we can do to help. If you have sin and you want to ask for forgiveness, if you need strength and want prayers, we'll do that. Whatever it might be. This morning I'm going to ask you to please come while the others stand and as we sing.